25, 30 minutes tonight.
Very good. Thanks so much. I'm David. I am a recovered cocaine addict and addict of many other things, sadly or fortunately. It's great to be here with everybody today. I've got a sponsor. His name's John, and he lives 2 doors down from me, which is convenient. There's no excuse for me not to be able to talk to him all the time, but of course, I still find reasons not to talk to him, right? And I sponsor many people, and then I step guide some other people, and I sponsor and step guide both men and women. And the women that I work with, my wife's in recovery too, almost as long as me, a couple of years less. I've been clean and sober since March 21st, 2004. And so the women that I sponsor, my wife knows, and she approves, and it's all on the level. And it's amazing how I can help women in recovery because I'm not interested in sleeping with them. And news to me and my ego, they're not interested in sleeping with me either, right? This is just all about us trying to get better and letting go to those old ideas and motives and things like this that would have maybe limited, ways in which I could help men and women. And selfishly, I'm going to ask, please come on the camera. I want to look at everybody's face. I understand if you're in the middle of cooking dinner and your kids are pulling on your hair and stuff, okay. But if you can come on the camera and make eye contact with me, I'm so grateful for that. And I've been clean and sober a long time. A very big advocate and devotee of recovery that comes out of the big book, and part of the way in which I try to help people get through the book beyond, the people out here physically near me that I help, in sponsoring and step guiding. My buddy David Glasgow is on here with me. He's my best buddy in recovery. He lives out we're in rural Illinois, about 70 miles west of the big city of Chicago. But out here, we're in the country. I mean, it's very straight country out here. And we're doing things the way that we believe they ought to be done coming out of the book as we understand how recovery was being worked in the late 1930s. And so, a couple of things that David and I and some of our running buddies do is we have a Thursday night, 6 p.m. Central Time. So it's midnight for you guys to realize, very late, but a very slow paced review through the big book that we do. If it's okay with the group, after I'm done talking, I can share that link in the chat. It's run as a non-fellowship group. We used to do it as an AA meeting, and then we decided to just make it a big book study because we had people from all sorts of fellowships that wanted to study recovery out of the big book. And we felt it was most important to bring the message out of the book and let people take it back to AA and CA and HA and any of the fellowships that use our amazing book, the big book. And right now we're up to also another activity we're doing that's been amazing. And it came from all these great international Zoom meetings. So David and I, ever since COVID started, like everybody else, we hit the Zoom. We came into Zoom like everybody else, and we found this amazing family of people recovering just like us across the pond. One of these problems that I fall into when I allow my ego to regenerate is I think I'm like Captain AA, like I'm the only guy who studies the big book, like I know better than everybody. That's a fallacy. But one thing I was looking for when I was putting myself on the spiritual hilltop, I'm like, where are the other people that are loving the big book, that want to be doing recovery the way that Bill and Bob and the first 8,700 people were doing it? We found a lot of you guys right here on Zoom, and it's been amazing. And so I and David and a bunch of our friends, as mentioned, Young's Audio Anonymous. Young's a guy I met, I think, online a couple of years ago. He's become a good buddy. I've never met in person, but we're always texting and chatting, seeing each other in meetings. He's a great guy, and I've met a lot of people like that in meetings, and I love carrying this message. And so I increasingly had more and more people saying, hey, can you take me through the steps? Hey, can you take me through the steps? It's a little tricky being 6 hours apart. So we started a Saturday morning, 12 weeks to take the steps with me and David and my sponsee Heather and a couple other people. And we're on week 7. We just got through steps 5, 6, 7. And it's been an amazing experience. And it's a very international group. And I'm just sharing all this with you guys to share about, like, recovery coming out of the book is so important to me. It saved my life, and it didn't just save it, 19 years ago when I first got clean and sober, but increasingly, it really saved my life in the past few years. I mentioned COVID and the pandemic, and when this hit, and we all had to stop going to these in-person meetings, and we all figured out how to log into Zoom and to expand what we did online, I had the beginning of what was another spiritual experience, another spiritual awakening, which is that I was working recovery, and I had for a long time, and I'd been continuously clean and sober for a long time, and I was doing pretty well. Okay, and I felt like I knew the program recovery in the book pretty well. But some local friends of ours, same type thing I was just talking about, came and said, they kept asking David, hey, David, can we study with you? Can you take us to the book? And people were asking me, hey, David, can we study with you? Can take you to the book? So we started this online group locally, and we couldn't get together. And what it forced me to do, if all of a sudden in an organized setting, I was sitting up front here, talking out of the book like I knew what I was talking about, I decided I'd better really know what I was talking about. And I doubled down, tripled down, quadrupled down my study. And how did I study? Well, I studied out of the book for sure. And I'd always been a big listener to recovery podcasts, but man, did I really get into listening to podcasts. I started listening to Joe and Charlie's Big Book Comes Alive Again. If you guys have never listened to that, again, reach out to me. That's my number. It's country code 1, and then the rest of the number is my phone number. Reach me on WhatsApp, guys. Guys, men, feel free to reach out. Women, you can reach out, but I'm just going to redirect you to one of my female sponsees after I say hi, make an introduction. But I'm happy to send you a link to Joe and Charlie's Big Book Comes Alive. If you've never listened to these guys, they're both dead now for a long time, but there is no better duo ever who can simplify the big book in this program recovery like they can. After Bill and Bob, I don't think there's any duo that ever did more for 12-step recovery than Joe and Charlie did. Listen to those guys. I listened to them on a loop for seemingly years, and then there's been so many other powerful speakers that hopefully you guys have found, and if you haven't, I'm going to give you some names. Mark Houston, he's also passed on. Brilliant. Joe Hawk, he's also passed away. Brilliant. Chris and Myers Raymer, a couple brothers that live in Texas. Hard asses. I love their message. No nonsense. Cut out the crap. Get sober. Get well. Charlie and Katie Parker. Listen to Charlie Parker. He's going to die imminently. His poor guy's got liver cancer. And so many more people. And happy to share some more names with all you guys. Right? I'm so devoted to this practice of recovery because, guys, I got this gift from people just like you when I desperately needed it when I came in. And I wasn't even fully convinced that I was ready. I forgot to set my timer. All right, setting my timer. I'll minus a few minutes off that. I wasn't even fully convinced that I was in the right place. What happened was I was a very unhappy guy, did a lot of drinking, did a lot of drugging, and I was on this trajectory where I kept staying alive, which was kind of a problem. The big book talks about being doomed to this alcoholic death. And the problem with that is it never came. I had those experiences where I was looking for, I think, a spiritual awakening when I was still in active addiction. The problem was I was looking in the wrong place. I was looking for that new substance, that new intoxicant, or maybe that new activity that was going to make me feel whole. If I look at my using history, it's like a multicolored chart. Like, well, from here to here, I was drinking too much. From here to here, I was smoking too much pot. From here to here, doing too much cocaine. Well, that was more like here to here. Here to here, I was taking too many tabs, and acid and mushrooms and anything I could get my hands on. And when I wasn't taking some sort of intoxicant, you better believe I was finding some other way to act out. I was overeating. I was running up my credit cards. I was definitely treating women like sex, pursuit and then acquisition and then remorse. Gambling too much, because my addiction, my fundamental problem, the cocaine gave me my seat in the room, guys. There's no question. But my fundamental problem is the unmanageability of my life. That's stated in the first step. Otherwise said, the unmanageability is my spiritual malady. It's my spiritual sickness. It's that my head, my heart, and my gut, where my thoughts, my emotions, and my attitudes live, it's all sorts of messed up. And so when I was able to put down the alcohol for a little time, or I was able to put down the cocaine for a little time, something else bubbled up. It was always another intoxicant or another process, right? In my experience, speaking for myself, as I introduce, I'm sharing my experience, strength, and hope. I definitely can share my experience. But the other thing I always want to convey is my knowledge, right? The knowledge that came out of the book, but the experience, was my journey. And what my experience was is if I was able to put something down, I picked it back up because I always felt lousy inside. And this is one of the most misunderstood, one of the biggest secrets we have in recovery. I came in because I couldn't put down the cocaine. Abso-flippin-lutely. But what I've learned and what's continued to be very clear to me is that's not my biggest problem. It's a problem. Right? But the book talks about this too. It finally culminates, I think, on page 58, or David can correct me if I got it wrong, where the book's implying alcohol is not really my biggest problem. Cocaine is not my really biggest problem. And then it finally concludes on a page where it says, liquor was but a symptom. Cocaine was but a symptom. Because my spiritual malady, my soul sickness, my cancerous soul is ultimately my biggest problem. And I know this because when I could put down the alcohol for a little bit, when I could put down the cocaine, when I could put down the other things, when I could stop chasing women for remorseless sex, no matter what, I always turned to something, and it never made me feel any better. Fundamentally, my life's unmanageable, right? And I got to get better. This is a spiritual program. We've all heard it said, or sometimes I hear it say the spiritual parts of the program. Sneak preview, if you're new, there are not spiritual parts to this program. The entire program is spiritual. What does that mean? If you're new, the reason why I had to start with page 27 is I'm trying to skip to the best part. I want everyone to focus on the hope that we have today. So why did I come in? I could tell you guys lots of drinking and drugging stories. I don't know if that would increase my credibility with you guys or not. Trust me, I was an absolute train wreck, okay? Did I love my very first drink? I don't know. I liked it. What I really loved is I was doing this taboo thing that I was sure as heck was not supposed to be doing. Right? Did I love my first bump of cocaine? I do have to say, absolutely flipping yes. I felt so cool, so strong, right? This thing was expensive, right? All the good-looking girls like to suck this powder up their nose with me, which seems ridiculous 19 years later, but it was such an attractive thing back then, right? And I'm sure women felt the same way about the men they were partying with, right? I loved this thing, but the cocaine owned me. Right? It owned me from day one. And yeah, I broke up with it for times, but every time, like I said, when I broke up with it, you know, its evil brother or its evil sister, it had many other names, would just come into line. I came in because I could not stop drugging. There's no question about that. Here's what I learned, and here's what I understand more now than anything else. That as a real addict, and I'm using the word real on purpose because in the big book it talks about the real alcoholic. So as you're reading the big book, if you can't reconcile yourself to the term alcoholic, just substitute the word addiction and addict. It's real simple, right? One illness with many names. So I'm a real addict, a real alcoholic, as the book talks about. And then I'm sick in three ways. I'm sick physically, right? I'm powerless. I'm sick physically and powerless physically in that I have an allergic reaction. When I put cocaine into my body, I break out in an allergy, which looks like a craving. I don't stop at a bump. I don't stop at 2 bumps. I don't stop at all. I go and I go and I go until I run out or pass out. I'm also powerless mentally in that when I do put it down, when I do stop, and I was great at stopping. I stopped many times. I couldn't stay stopped. I was powerless to the compulsion, to the obsession that always drew me back to cocaine or something else, some other way that I could smash down a spiritual malady. And that ever-present spiritual malady is what always triggered my mental obsession. That I just felt lousy all the times. Guys, if you haven't studied the book, I'm not going to take you to it right now, but page 52 in the second paragraph has this brilliant description of what, you know what, I am going to go to. I can't help it. It's too good. All right, page 52 in the second paragraph. You got your book, open it up. If not, I'll narrate to you. It's a paragraph that we call the bedevilments. It's not the only description of what it looks like to have an unmanageable life or to be spiritually ill, but it's a pretty damn good one. I'm going to read it in question forms. It's so important as you're studying the book. And by the way, guys, I study this book and I encourage you to study it. This is not a novel. This is not like, ooh, the coolest, latest, most thrilling, gripping bestseller by John Grisham, and I read it, and then I give it to David, and I'm like, dude, you got to read this. It's a great story. No. This is a textbook. It's an instruction manual. It's intended to be read and studied over and over because it describes my exact problem as a real addict, and it describes the exact solution and how to get from the problem to the solution. And I'll come back to 52 in a second. Let me be clear about this too. I talked about it sort of in passing, but step one, that is our problem statement. That we were powerless, I'm going to put it into singular. That I'm powerless over alcohol. I'm powerless over cocaine. Right? Powerless physically and mentally, like I said. But then there's that dash. that my life had become unmanageable. It's not causal. It's not unmanageable because of the powerlessness. It's in addition to. And the book talks about all this too. Read it with open eyes and an open mind with, ideally, someone who's got some experience. If you have a sponsor, hopefully they're a big book sponsor and they come out of this book, right? So the problem step is step 1. It's my problem statement. Step 12 is the solution, that I have a spiritual awakening as the singular result of these steps. Right? Not as a result, but a singular result. And then what do I do with it? Well, then I carry that message to other people, to alcoholics, to addicts. And the message is what's in this book, that they too can have a spiritual awakening from working the steps. I need a spiritual awakening because my biggest problem is my spiritual malady. So coming back to 52 in the second paragraph, starting with the second sentence, whenever there's statements about the alcoholic, the addict in this book, turn them into questions. Because when I'm reading this book and it's like the alcoholic is this, the alcoholic does that, the alcoholic behaves like this, I think the book's talking about you guys. I need to turn it back on me to make sure that I personalize this content. So how about these bedevilments? This is what being spiritually ill looks like for many of us. Certainly what it looked like for me. Was I having trouble with personal relationships? Yeah, with women, I could not have successful relationship with women. How about with my friends? How about my work relationships? How about my parents? Constant arguments and petty jealousies. Could I control my emotional nature? Never. I was always unreasonably angry about the stupidest things, guys. Was I a prey to misery and depression? Every morning I woke up miserable. Every morning. Every morning I woke up and I would say to myself, oh, not again. Not again what? Not again life. Not again anything. I was so miserable. The analogy that I came up with some years ago is, it's like I couldn't handle it all. I had 5 big pots of misery and a 4-burner stove. No matter how I tried to move it around, I couldn't handle all the misery that I felt. I was overwhelmed with it. I couldn't make a living. Could I have a job? Could I be employed? Yeah, I mean, pretty much anybody can have a job, even if we're in really bad shape. But was I coming late? Was I leaving early? Was I taking too long to smoke breaks? Did I have a lousy attitude? Was I straight up stealing from my job? Did I have a feeling of uselessness? Absolutely. Like going through life, what's the point? Was I full of fear? Full of fear. So David and I go to treatment centers a couple times a month out here in Illinois, and a lot of times we're in a men's only unit, and I say, who is full of fear? And you get like 3-4 guys out of 25 raise their hands, and that's crap. 100% of us, because men, we think we got to be macho, right? That's how we were raised. We got to be tough. We're not afraid of anything. Guys, full of fear. Tell me if you relate to either of these scenarios. Got my girlfriend, and my girlfriend says, hey, why don't you buy me a ring? Shouldn't we be getting engaged to be married? Guys, what's the first thought we think of? Oh my God, it's going to be the last woman I'm ever going to have sex with the rest of my life, right? This is unreasonable fear about something ridiculous. I know the women always smirk at this. But then what's the second thought I have? Well, if I don't get engaged, buy her this ring and get married, I'm going to be alone the rest of my life. I'm afraid I'm going to be lonely. So I'm damned if I get engaged. I'm damned if I don't. And how about that job where I could barely make a living? They say, David, you haven't been screwing up as much. We're going to promote you to be assistant manager. What's my first thought? Oh God, if I take that promotion, they're going to expect even more of me. I'm really going to have to get my act together and work harder. Well, what about if I turn down the promotion? Well, I'm never going to make enough money. I'm not going to be able to buy the engagement ring, and I'm going to be alone the rest of my life. Do you guys see how fear gets us from I'm just coming up with 2 scenarios on each of those examples. I could come up with 17 different outcomes, and I guarantee you guys would all be nodding. Every one of them would have a fear outcome to it. We're full of fear, not a little afraid, not occasionally scared, full of fear. Were we unhappy? Yeah, perpetually. Do I even need to go on? Who the hell's happy as you're coming into treatment or a hospital or your first CA meeting? 0, right? We don't come into these places on a winning streak. Lastly, I seem to be of real help to other people. Real help. You know what being of real help to other people means? It means I give and I say yes without any thought to myself, my self-interest, or my welfare. That's not how I went through life. Here's how I went through life. David, you get a pickup truck. I got to move out of my apartment. Can I use your pickup truck? And I would say, yes, buddy, absolutely. And you know why I said yes, absolutely? Because right up here in my head, I was keeping a little ledger. And it was Monday, April 10th from 2 p.m. to 5 p.m. Help Nancy move her apartment. And then when I needed something, whether or not it was convenient for Nancy, I was going to come calling. Everything I did was out of self-interest. I was keeping the ledger, so I was going to get mine. I only knew how to act out of self-interest. Guys, this is my problem. This is what unmanageability in my life looks like. This is what it looks like to be spiritually ill. And as long as I feel this way, desperately miserable and lonely and angry and going nowhere at work and going nowhere in my life, I'm going to try to find something that makes me feel better. And guess what makes me feel better for a long time? Cocaine, ecstasy, mushrooms, Budweiser, Kettle One, too much sex, internet gambling, casino gambling, buying stuff, any and all. I'll do something, I'll do anything so that I don't feel like this. So what I need is a solution, and I need a way of life that's going to get me out of those bedevilments and keep me out of those bedevilments. And guys, that's what page 27 is all about. Whenever I meet with a newcomer and they all have the same weird look, and it's the same weird look I had on my face at the beginning. I'm like, got to get the goddess to understand them. And after they have disgust, they look confused. Right? I say, got to have a spiritual awakening. And what does that mean? What it means, what it looks like, is exactly what's described on page 27, guys. Page 27, to give you a little more backstory, because I didn't have us read the whole thing. It's really 2 pages of the story. This is before AA. And when I'm talking about AA and referencing AA, it's the original 12-step fellowship. CA spawned out of AA, like all the other 12-step fellowship did. So I give respect to AA, because without AA, who knows if we'd even have a CA. You know, would the founders of CA figured this out on their own? Don't know. Hard for me to imagine if you understand the history of how alcoholics came together. A lot of confluence of coincidence and factors, and I can't get into the whole history lesson here today, but I'm going to give you a little bit of the history here about this particular story. Right? So before AA was around, in the early part of the 1900s, there was this psychiatrist, the doctor referenced here in today's reading. His name was Carl Gustav Jung. Some of you guys have probably heard of Carl Jung, especially if you're older like me. Okay, Carl Jung was one of the 2 very famous disciples of Sigmund Freud. Even if you don't know exactly what he did, everybody here has heard of Sigmund Freud in college or in high school, whatever. You heard it in school somewhere, you saw it in a movie. Sigmund Freud is basically the godfather of modern psychoanalysis, psychotherapy. He figured out the ego and the superego and the id and all these things I barely understand. I studied in college. I don't really remember much of it. But he's the guy who really invented getting better by laying on the couch, talking through your childhood, understanding what's wrong with me today because my mom didn't hug me enough, because I got bullied at school, you know, because I was chubbier than the other kids, whatever the problem was. Freud believed enough psychoanalysis, laying on the couch, getting inside my head was going to fix me. And Freud had 2 main disciples. Another one was this guy named Adler, and he was just like Freud. He believed everything could be fixed through therapy and maybe pharmacology, Valium and Xanax, stuff like that. But Freud's other big disciple was Carl Jung. And how Jung differed from Adler and Freud, this is really important, guys, is that Jung believed and didn't really understand why, but he believes some of our problems could be fixed with a spiritual solution. So in this story, Jung is talking with this guy named Roland Hazard. Right? Roland Hazard was an American businessman, very successful business owner, very wealthy guy, very bad alcoholic. So he was such a bad alcoholic, but he was also so wealthy, they took a year off work. I don't know what he's exactly doing at the time, but he's wealthy enough to move to Switzerland and stay in the care of Dr. Jung for a year. So guys, imagine this, right? Imagine if you had like COVID at the beginning, it was really bad. David and I had a buddy like that. He almost died. Imagine if, and you guys have heard of Dr. Fauci over here and putting the politics aside, he was the guy who was sort of in charge in the U.S. of our COVID response. Imagine if you had COVID so bad and you were in the care of the foremost authority on COVID response in the United States or in Scotland or wherever you happen to live. Right? That's what Roland did. He went and stayed in Dr. Jung's care for a year. He laid on the couch. He talked about how his mother didn't love him enough, how his father used to yell at him, all these things that can come up in therapy. And I'm not deriding therapy. Therapy is brilliant. I've done lots of it. I did a lot of it before I got sober, utter waste of time and money. I've done a lot of it after I got sober, entirely different experience. So I'm not deriding it. I'm just saying in Roland's case, and in my case and many other people I've met, doing therapy before a spiritual experience, not going to be effective. It wasn't effective for Roland because here's what happened. After a year of studying in Dr. Jung's care, Roland thought he was cured. He said to the doctor, I think I got it. We've done all this work. I know how the inside of my mind works. I'm going to go home to the United States. I'm going to resume life. I'm not going to drink anymore. And guess what Dr. Jung said? He said, I agree. I think you're cooked. I think you're good. Go ahead. Days after Roland left Dr. Jung's care, Roland drank again. After a year in his care, the most brilliant psychiatrist on the planet, guys. A year. And he drank again. So he comes back and he said, why can I not stop drinking? And this is where we picked up with the reading today. Right? I think Marcel read for us. And the little part before that is what the doctor tells him why he can't stop drinking is the doctor said, you have the mind of a chronic alcoholic. I've never seen one single case recover where that state of mind existed to the extent that it does in you. Our friend felt as though the gates of hell had closed on him with a clang. I used the COVID example. Imagine, God forbid, you guys got cancer. Imagine if you got cancer, right? And you went to, the best hospital in Scotland, and you went to see the chief of neurosurgery, and he looked you in the eye and he said, I've never seen anybody with cancer like yours get better. Imagine that, guys. Death sentence. And if you're a real alcoholic, a real addict like I am, this untreated illness carries the same death sentence. He said to the doctor, Roland said to the doctor, is there no exception? Yes, replied the doctor, there is. Exceptions to cases such as yours have been occurring since early times. Here and there, once in a while. And he's saying here and there, once in a while, because again, remember, this is before 12-step recovery. So there wasn't a lot of this. Today, we can all have a vital spiritual experience if we just do all the work thoroughly and honestly. He said here and there, once in a while, alcoholics have had what are called vital spiritual experiences. Vital meaning life-giving, life-sustaining, and spiritual meaning beyond me, beyond the corpus, the physical, beyond the mental, beyond the thinking, bigger than me. I don't have to understand or define it. I just know it's bigger than me. It's outside. To me, these occurrences, these vital spiritual experiences are phenomena. It means like you can't really predict, understand, or explain it. They appear to be in the nature of huge emotional displacements and rearrangements. Ideas, stuff that lives up here in my head, emotions, the stuff that lives in my heart, and attitudes, stuff that's rotting in my belly, in my gut. Ideas, emotions, and attitudes, which were once the guiding forces of the lives of these men, are suddenly cast to one side, and don't even worry about suddenly, because most of the time it happens gradually for us. Read Appendix 2, the spiritual experience. It'll tell you this. We have the educational variety. We get better over time. Okay? So ideas, emotions, and attitudes, which were once the guiding force of the lives of these men, so my ideas, emotions, and attitudes that were driving me through life are cast to one side. And a completely new set of conceptions and motives begin to dominate them. I can tell you in my personal experience, in the experience of many other people I've seen get better in 12-step recovery in Cocaine Anonymous, God does not replace my old wretched ideas and my evil emotions and my terrible prejudices. He doesn't replace those things with worse ones or similar ones. All of it is better. This is what God does for me and does for you. New thoughts, new feelings, new attitudes. So guess what? Because I'm thinking, feeling, and reacting differently, I'm no longer spiritually ill. I no longer live in those bedevilments. This is what it looks like when I get the promise of the 12th step. And because I'm no longer spiritually ill, my brain doesn't say, David, pick up a drink, have a couple of bumps. And because I don't pick up the drink or have a couple of bumps or take a tab, guess what? I don't break out in craving because I don't put anything in my body. A minus B minus C. Sum it to zero or whatever, botched analogy I want to make. I get spiritually right by working the steps to get right. And then I'm going to talk in a second about how I stay right. Here's the last thing in the part of this reading I want to touch on. He goes on to say, in fact, the doctor goes on to say, in fact, I've been trying to produce some such emotional rearrangement within you. With many individuals, the methods which I employed are successful, but I've never been successful with an alcoholic description. You know why he could help other alcoholics and addicts before? Because they weren't real alcoholics and addicts. Yeah, they hit it hard. Yeah, they used too much. But they didn't suffer like I do, like I'm guessing you guys do with all three illnesses, physical, mental, and spiritual. I get right by getting from the problem step, step one, through all the steps in order, thoroughly and honestly, omitting nothing, so that I get the promise of the 12th step, which is that I'm going to have a spiritual awakening as the singular result of these steps. And then you know how I stay close to God? How I stay clean and sober and right-minded, not spiritually sick, how I stay spiritually well? I carry this message to other alcoholics and addicts. And I continue to live in the disciplines of 10, 11, and 12, 10 and 11, where I'm staying in tune with God from the moment I wake up to the moment that my head hits the pillow, and every moment in between. And here's the last thing I want to say, because I know I'm about out of time here. Guys, this is the whole point. If no one's explained it to you, we're sick in 1. We get better in 12. But then our purpose, our real purpose, is to be of maximum service to God and the people about us, principally that we carry this message of recovery to other alcoholics and addicts. That is the number one way to stay right, to stay close to God. Okay? And here's the very last thing I'm going to leave you with. How many people we got here in the meeting today? We got 46 people. How cool is that? From this group alone, we have the numbers of the 46 of us. And actually, there's a couple more. There's 48, because there's 3 guys there in the recovery group. 48 of us, this group alone, can carry the message of recovery to every struggling person on the planet. Every struggling person on the planet. You know how I know this? Because if I carry this message, if I sponsor 3 people through the steps in my entire course of recovery, and I've done way more than that, so I'm doing more than my share. But if I get 3 people through the book the right way so they have a spiritual awakening, and then each of the 3 of them only carries the message correctly to 3 people, and each of those 3, so if we only ever sponsor 3 people the right way, and those 3 people carry it to 3, and let's say we do that 15 times down the road. Check my math after we're done if you don't believe me. 3 to the 15th power, 3 times 3 times 3, 15 times, is 14,348,907 people. So what that means is coming from me and the first 3 people I sponsor, that's going to cover 14.5 million people that need this message. Now I multiply that times 48. That's 688,747,536 people. 689 million people. There's 8 billion people on this planet. 10% have some sort of addiction issue. Let's say 2/3 are real addicts. So 10% is going to be 800,000. This group can cover 689 million of them. We got it. We got the numbers just from the 48 of us right now. And how do you have to do it? Work the steps. Take the steps thoroughly and honestly yourself. And then take 3 people through it and tell them to do the same. That's it. And we're going to help 689 million people recover from the hopeless state of mind and body. That's all I got. Thanks for having me, guys.